Welcome to Bedtime Astronomy. Explore the wonders of the cosmos with our soothing Bedtime Astronomy podcast. Each episode offers a gentle journey through the stars, planets, and beyond, perfect for unwinding after a long day. Let's travel through the mysteries of the universe as you drift off into a peaceful slumber under the night sky.
Okay, let's unpack this. If you're, planning humanity's big leap to the stars, designing that first permanent home off-world, you probably think your reading list is all like advanced physics, right? Material science, rocket stuff.
Right, the hard engineering, the technical specs.
Exactly. But what if the real playbook, the key to making it stick long-term, wasn't it in equations, but thousands of years old, buried in the archaeology of ancient migrations?
That's the fascinating twist here, because those core human challenges, isolation, running out of stuff, keeping your culture going, they're timeless, aren't they?
Totally timeless. You see it again and again.
Whether you're talking Polynesian voyagers finding some tiny atoll or, future colonists landing near Proxima Centauri, the people problems, the non-engineering hurdles, they're the same. We pour billions into the how to get there, the rocket science.
The shiny part.
The launch.
But the real make or break challenge, the existential one, is how do you stay? How do you actually endure generation after generation so far from home? Right. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. We're looking at this, really insightful paper published in Acta Astronautica. It's by Thomas Leppard and some fellow archaeologists. And they're proposing something pretty radical, using the history of how humans spread across the Pacific Islands, all those scattered, isolated places, as the ultimate template. A tested guide for settling planets, moons, maybe even space habitats.
It really shifts the focus, doesn't it? Away from just the technical, can we build it, towards anthropological foresight, can we make it last? By looking at the archaeological evidence which settlements thrive for centuries, which ones, disappeared. They've boiled it down to 8 core lessons.
8 lessons, okay.
Yeah, these are the factors they argue fundamentally dictate whether an off-world colony succeeds, whether it's resilient, whether it's viable in the long run.
So our mission today for this deep dive is to really distill those 8 lessons. They've split them neatly into 2 big categories, which helps. Physiological factors and biocultural factors.
Right, the where and the who, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And the goal here is to give you, the listener, a kind of shortcut, a way to get informed about the non-engineering challenges, the human side, the cultural side of actually leaving Earth for good. We're using this model based on ancient migrations, thousands of years of human experience, to figure out our future among the stars. It's pretty mind-bending when you think about it.
It is. What's so compelling is how these challenges repeat. The isolation, the resource limits. It's a universal human story, just on a cosmic scale now.
Okay, so let's anchor this discussion in the model itself first. Island archaeology. When I picture settling the Pacific, I think of, incredible navigators finding these tiny specks of land in a vast ocean. How does that specific history translate to setting up shop on, say, a cold Martian plateau or building a giant rotating habitat?
Well, the translation works because the core challenges faced by those voyagers were fundamentally the same ones a space colony will face. Primarily, absolute uncompromising isolation.
Right.
Completely.
Yeah.
And when humans spread across the Pacific, they didn't just find one type of island. They encountered incredibly diverse environments. You had huge, resource-rich volcanic islands, think Hawaii, that could support large, complex societies for centuries, even millennia.
Okay.
But then you also had these tiny low-lying coral atolls, often with really fragile ecosystems, unpredictable resources. And archaeology shows us these places had much higher rates of, demographic collapse. Sometimes settlements just vanished.
And the power of using that archaeological record is... It's data, right?
Yeah.
It's empirical evidence of how humans handle extreme isolation and limited resources. It's like a natural experiment that ran for thousands of years, a perfect proxy for space challenges.
Exactly. It's analyzing what worked, but maybe more importantly, what failed, what led to the collapse of a settlement.
And the authors are really clear, aren't they? This isn't about rocket fuel calculations or, how thick the habitat walls need to be.
Not at all. They're focused squarely on the factors beyond just technical capability. Things like genetics, population size, long-term resource sustainability, cultural stability. These are the things they argue really determine success.
So you could build the most amazing, technologically perfect habitat on Titan.
Right. But if your population suffers from severe genetic drift because you started too small, or if, say, hoarding the best resources leads to political breakdown in 3 generations.
Then the engineering marvel doesn't matter. The colony just fades out.
Precisely. The colony dies. So the successes and failures we see in the Pacific, from the earliest settlements near Australia all the way out to Rapa Nui or Hawaii, that gives us a really robust data set on what sustainable colonization actually looks like. It's history as a laboratory.
A historical laboratory for future space travel. Love it.
It is. And digging through all that evidence led them to structure their findings into these 8 lessons, split into those 2 categories we mentioned. Should we recap those quickly?
Yeah, good idea. Lay out the framework.
Okay, first up, you have the physiological factors. These are mostly about location, resources, geography. Think of it as the physical setup, the planet, the moon, the habitat itself, and how it relates physically to everything around it, especially Earth. It's asking, where should we actually go? What makes a good location?
Makes sense. The physical environment.
Then second, you've got the biocultural factors. This is all about the people. Population size, demographics, how society is organized, cultural connections. This is arguably trickier, It's about ensuring the people survive and thrive long term, not just the buildings they live in. It answers, who should we send and how should they live together successfully?
Location and resources versus people and culture. That's a really helpful split. Okay, let's dive into those physiological factors first then. Lessons 1 through 4. What does ancient seafaring tell us about picking the right cosmic real estate? All right, lesson 1. Distance is paramount. Now, my first thought is travel time, obviously. Less time in space is better. But the paper digs deeper, using a biological concept, right, about why being close to Earth, the source, is so critical.
That's right. The core idea, drawn straight from archaeology, is that colonization is just overwhelmingly more successful when the new colony is physically close to where the settlers came from.
Mm-hmm.
Faster travel for help or supplies is definitely a part of it, sure. But the real insight from the archaeology is the absolute need for what biologists call a metapopulation structure.
Metapopulation. Okay, explain that in like a space context.
So in biology, a metapopulation is basically a network of separate local populations that still interact. People or animals move between them sometimes.
Okay.
Applied to space, it means a new colony, especially early on, can't just be this totally isolated, standalone thing. It has to function, at least initially, as part of a bigger connected community. This larger network, this metapopulation, it shares resources, it provides demographic support like new people, and it keeps cultural ties strong with the home base, with Earth.
So let's use the Pacific analogy. If a small island colony, a tiny population suddenly faces a famine, or maybe a disease sweeps through, or they just have bad luck with birth rates.
Exactly. If they're close enough, other nearby islands, and crucially, the main source population, can send help relatively quickly. Food, tools, maybe even new families to boost the numbers, and importantly, the genetic diversity.
So it buffers against those inevitable crises.
Precisely. That initial phase of any colony, whether it's on an atoll or Mars, is incredibly fragile. Being closer to Earth makes managing that fragility, especially demographic ups and downs, much less risky. The colony can lean on Earth's resources and, frankly, its huge gene pool until it's stable enough to stand on its own.
So proximity is like the ultimate safety net. It turns a precarious outpost into just one part of a bigger, more resilient system.
It absolutely does. And this is the fundamental challenge for interstellar colonies, isn't it? They simply won't have that physical proximity safety net. The connection is just too slow.
Which really underscores why maintaining some kind of link, even if it's just information, becomes so vital later on. Okay, that's distance. Lesson 2, size matters. Seems obvious, maybe. Bigger is better. But the archaeology makes it sound like almost a fundamental law.
It really does seem to be. The core idea is simple. Larger astronomical bodies dramatically increase the chances of a colony succeeding long term.
Okay.
Looking back at the Pacific, it's really clear. The bigger, higher volcanic islands, they supported much more complex, stable societies that lasted for centuries compared to the tiny, low-lying atolls. Those smaller islands often saw a complete environmental collapse or social breakdown within just a few generations.
Yeah, that makes intuitive sense. A bigger island just has more stuff, more varied terrain, maybe different microclimates, more potential for different kinds of resources, bigger water catchments.
Exactly. And that translates directly to space. Larger areas usually mean more abundant and more diverse resources, not just water ice, but potentially complex minerals deep down, different atmospheric gases you might process, maybe geothermal energy sources. It just makes the massive challenge of becoming self-sufficient logistically simpler.
Whereas if you land on some small asteroid,
you pretty much know what you've got. It's likely homogeneous, finite, but land on Mars. The potential resource base is vast and varied. The core, the mantle, the atmosphere, polar ice caps. It's a whole world of possibilities.
But the paper does acknowledge the obvious limits, right? I mean, we can't just pick Jupiter because it's huge. Gravity is a bit of an issue.
Oh, absolutely. You have to operate within the bounds of human habitability. The lesson isn't pick the biggest thing regardless. It's more of a prioritization principle. If you have a choice between, say, a small, easy-to-reach asteroid that has one specific resource but requires you to import everything else, versus a larger planet or moon that's maybe harder to get to initially but could potentially supply 50% of your needs locally. The archaeology screams that the larger body is the smarter long-term bet.
So invest in the potential for future self-sufficiency, even if the upfront cost or difficulty is higher.
That's the idea. That initial difficulty pays off massively in resilience generations down the line. Size provides options, it provides buffers. Small and simple is fragile.
Okay, which actually flows really nicely into lesson 3, archipelagic configuration. If size matters and networks matter, then the next step is connecting multiple islands.
Indeed. The core idea here is that you maximize resilience by setting up shop in a configuration where there are multiple potential colonies close to each other. You're basically trying to mimic a natural archipelago, like a chain of islands.
Right. Not just one isolated outpost, but a cluster of interacting settlements.
Exactly. And the huge historical benefit of this setup, whether it's islands in the Pacific or habitats in space, is that it provides immediate evacuation opportunities if one colony fails catastrophically.
Okay. So if one island gets hit by a tsunami or its volcano erupts.
Or in space, maybe one habitat suffers a major life support failure or gets hit by a micrometeoroid. The people, the knowledge, maybe even critical equipment can potentially shift to a nearby functioning colony relatively quickly. It dramatically reduces the risk of a single disaster wiping out the entire venture.
A single point of failure is deadly in this context.
Absolutely lethal. And the paper points out this applies directly to having multiple separate settlements on a planet's surface, like, say, different bases across Mars connected by rovers or tunnels. But it also applies really well to systems around gas giants. Think about Jupiter's big moons, Europa, Ganymede, Callisto. They're naturally clustered close together.
Right. A natural archipelago in space.
It's almost a perfect example. It fundamentally strengthens that whole metapopulation idea we talked about. A single giant space station, however impressive, is inherently more brittle, more fragile than a network of smaller interconnected stations or habitats. Maybe one specializes in mining, one in agriculture, one in research.
And they support each other.
Exactly. Yeah. That ability to shift people, knowledge, resources, even manufacturing capacity around the network, that's what builds resilience over centuries. You simply can't afford fragility when you're talking about establishing a permanent second branch of human civilization.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, lesson 4. This is the last of the physiological or location-based lessons, but it feels like it bridges into the people side of things too. Resource distribution and political stability.
Yes, this one is fascinating because it shows how the physical layout of resources can directly impact social structure and long-term stability. It's rooted in, well, millennia of human conflict, frankly.
Okay.
The core idea is that how resources are distributed is just as important as whether they exist at all. If the absolutely essential resources, think water on a dry island, or maybe easy access to a geothermal vent on an icy moon like Europa, if those are clustered together in one spot, making them easy for one group to control.
That breeds inequality, right?
Yeah,
potential conflict.
Immediately. It's a recipe for political instability. We've seen it countless times in history. Resource monopolies almost inevitably lead to centralized power, often authoritarian control, or eventually violent uprisings from those who are excluded.
Whereas if the resources are more spread out,
archaeology suggests societies tended to be more stable, or at least more flexible, when vital resources were naturally dispersed. It allowed for more internal movement, maybe less rigid social hierarchies. People could move if one area became depleted or controlled by a hostile group.
And the paper makes a really critical point here about isolation, doesn't it? This instability becomes truly existential only when the colony is totally cut off.
Exactly. For an interstellar colony, let's say, one where Earth is light years away and can't intervene, can't mediate disputes, can't enforce any kind of external political norms. In that scenario, how wealth and essential resources are distributed internally isn't just a social issue, it becomes a matter of life and death for the entire colony.
Wow. So imagine a Mars colony where the only reliable water ice is under the control of, say, the first habitat dome that landed there.
Whoever controls that dome basically controls the colony's future. It could lead instantly to rigid social classes, deep resentment, and potentially, violent civil breakdown. The whole project collapses from within.
So the archaeological lesson is almost preventative design. We need to choose settlement sites or even design artificial habitats, specifically to promote equitable access to critical resources from the start.
Precisely. You're literally trying to design away the seeds of future conflict, trying to avoid building in choke points that inevitably lead to inequality and centralized, potentially authoritarian control, especially when that colony is utterly alone.
These first 4 lessons really paint a picture, don't they? They dictate the cosmic address, the size, the network structure, even the internal layout of resources. It's about moving from just surviving the journey to designing for long-term social and physical resilience.
Absolutely. And now we shift focus from the landscape, the physical stage, to the actors, the people who have to live there, the biocultural factors. The next 4 lessons are all about the humans themselves.
All right, moving into the biocultural factors. Lesson 5 is a big one, and definitely where costs can skyrocket and debates get heated. Population minimums and heterogeneity. We know we need people, obviously, but how many is enough?
Yeah, this is absolutely critical because every person you send adds enormously to the cost and complexity, right? Launch mass is everything. And you see wildly different numbers thrown around by space enthusiasts.
I've seen some simulations, haven't you?
Yeah.
That one suggesting maybe only 22 people could technically keep a Mars colony going, genetically speaking, if managed perfectly.
Right, those very optimistic, highly controlled computer models. But then you see other estimates going way up, maybe 5,000 people or more needed for real long-term stability. It's a huge range.
So what does the archaeology, the actual historical record of island success and failure, tell us? Where does it land on this minimum number?
Well, it gives us a much higher floor and maybe a more sobering one. Based on the evidence of which isolated populations actually survived and maintained viability over centuries, the paper suggests a minimum founding population of at least 1,000 people.
1,000.
Yeah. And even then, the ideal recommendation is always as large as possible within the technological and ecological limits. That 1,000-person minimum isn't arbitrary. It's rooted in 2 really critical needs for long-term survival without outside help.
Okay, the first need is the one people often talk about. Genetics, right?
Yep.
Avoiding inbreeding and losing genetic diversity over time.
Exactly. 1,000 individuals is generally considered around the minimum needed to maintain enough genetic diversity to avoid serious problems from inbreeding or what's called genetic drift over many generations. If you start much smaller, you run into the founder effect, where the initial gene pool is just too limited, and genetic drift becomes a major issue. Meaning essential genetic variations needed for long-term health might just disappear by chance, and harmful recessive traits can become much more common. It leads to this slow, almost invisible decay in the population's overall health and ability to adapt. It's a silent killer for small, isolated groups.
Okay, but I have to push back a bit here. 1,000 people for a first Mars colony. That sounds almost impossibly expensive and complex compared to sending, say, 100. Did the authors grapple with the sheer practicality, the cost-benefit of that number from just a launch perspective?
They definitely acknowledge the immense technological and financial hurdles, but their perspective is strictly anthropological and focused on long-term viability. The archaeology is pretty blunt, start too small, and the colony is basically doomed to fail within a few centuries due to these inherent biological and social fragilities, no matter how good your technology is.
So they're saying, if we can't manage to send at least that many, maybe we're picking the wrong target. Or maybe we're just not ready for true colonization yet.
That seems to be the implication. It forces us to define success not just as landing people somewhere, but as establishing a population that can actually endure and thrive autonomously for generations. If the minimum viable number is 1,000, then that becomes the benchmark you have to aim for, however difficult.
Okay, that's the genetic side. But lesson 5 also stresses the need for heterogeneity in that population. It's not just about numbers, it's about who those people are.
Yes, this is equally crucial. You need far more than just, say, 1,000 brilliant engineers and scientists. You need diversity, diverse skills, diverse ways of thinking, diverse cultural backgrounds, different knowledge systems, philosophical depth, political experience, artistic expression.
A cross-section of humanity, really.
Pretty much. The archaeology clearly shows that settlements founded by groups with a wider range of skills and cultural adaptations generally fared much better in the long run than small, highly specialized groups, because inevitably, unforeseen crises will happen.
Right, something you didn't plan for.
Exactly. Maybe it's a weird pathogen that starts spreading in the closed-loop life support. Or a totally unexpected geological problem threatens the habitat. When the unknown unknowns hit, you need people who can think outside the box, generalists, people with experience from totally different fields. A large, varied population brings multiple ways of solving problems.
Whereas a homogeneous group, even if they're all experts in one thing,
they might solve the problems they expect really well. But diversity is the engine of resilience when you face something completely new. You need that wider pool of ideas and experiences to draw on.
So it's not just a gene pool issue, it's a complexity pool issue for the society itself. Fascinating. Okay, lesson 6 builds directly on this idea of keeping the population robust, sustaining the source link, keeping that connection back home.
Yes. The lesson is maintain a link to the source population Earth, and ideally to any other colonies you establish for as long as it's technologically possible.
And the benefits are pretty clear, right?
Absolutely. We touched on it with the metapopulation idea. It allows for demographic buffering, sending more people if needed. It allows for resource exchanges, maybe sending vital supplies or equipment Earth can produce more easily. And crucially, it allows for the constant flow of information, new ideas, cultural developments, scientific breakthroughs happening back on Earth. It prevents the colony from stagnating culturally and intellectually.
Okay, that link seems relatively manageable for, say, a Mars colony. Communication delays are minutes, potential travel time is months. But you mentioned earlier, this physical connection totally breaks down for interstellar travel. Light years mean round-trip communication takes decades. Physical travel is impossible for individuals. So what's the bare minimum link you need in that extreme isolation?
The authors are very clear on this. Even if physical travel and resource exchange become impossible, you absolutely must maintain bidirectional information flow.
Bidirectional.
Both ways.
Critically important. The colony needs to be able to send detailed information back to Earth about their environment, their successes, their failures, their discoveries. And just as importantly, they need to be able to receive information back from Earth, even if it takes decades for that signal to arrive. New science, cultural updates, solutions to problems others have faced.
So that information flow is the last thread connecting them to the rest of humanity, the last remnant of the metapopulation. Exactly. It's the only way to keep the colony's culture dynamic, to let it benefit from advancements made elsewhere, and maybe crucially, to help it avoid repeating mistakes that other colonies or Earth itself might have made. If that information flow becomes one way or gets cut off entirely, the colony essentially becomes a static cultural time capsule. It loses the ability to adapt and learn from the outside.
We need to design communication systems robust enough to span light years and decades, not just transport systems that span months. That's a profound long-term requirement. Okay, lesson 7. This one felt the most counterintuitive to me. The lesson is colonize again. You've just succeeded in setting up a stable base, and now the ancient wisdom says you need to immediately start planning to send people away again.
It does seem strange, doesn't it? Like you're undermining your own hard-won stability by diverting precious resources and people to a brand new, risky venture.
Yeah. Why not just consolidate, build up the first base?
But the archaeology provides a really compelling two-part rationale for this based on how successful populations historically split or fissioned.
Fissioning, like cell division, but for societies. Okay, what's rationale number 1?
It's about avoiding hitting a resource ceiling. Every isolated population, no matter how well managed, eventually starts bumping up against the limits of its environment's carrying capacity.
Okay, running out of room or a key resource.
Right. If that first successful colony just focuses inward, just stabilizes its home base, it runs a huge risk of eventually overshooting its local resources.
Yeah.
Maybe they deplete the easily accessible water ice or pollute their enclosed environment.
Yeah.
By actively sending out secondary colonies, even small ones, they immediately lessen the population pressure and resource demand on the original settlement.
It's like a release valve.
Exactly. And historically, groups that did this, that preemptively split and spread out, often survived regional disasters like droughts or famines that completely wiped out larger static populations that had stayed put. It builds in an immediate ecological and demographic buffer.
Okay, that makes sense as risk mitigation. What's the second rationale? It's about building their own network.
Precisely. It allows the original colony to start building its own network of connected populations, essentially creating its own local metapopulation. It transforms the first colony, say Mars, from being just an outpost of Earth into becoming a new source population for its own region.
So Mars sends colonists to Phobos, maybe Deimos, maybe out to Ceres in the asteroid belt.
Exactly. And suddenly Mars itself is the center of a new expanding network. By doing this, Mars has exponentially increased its own resilience, its influence, its demographic stability, because it now has its own archipelago that it anchors, its resilience through self-replication.
So this suggests that if the real goal isn't just one successful colony, but ensuring humanity's permanent survival off-world, then success isn't measured by how long the first colony lasts.
But perhaps by how quickly and successfully it manages to launch the second colony, and then the third.
Wow. It completely changes the mindset from just survival to dynamic, continuous expansion.
It does. The archaeological record seems to suggest that stopping movement, becoming static in isolation, eventually leads to stagnation and increases the risk of failure. Continuous outward expansion, even if it's just small groups budding off, seems to be the key to multi-generational success in these isolated contexts.
Fascinating. Okay, finally, lesson 8. Preservation first. This sounds straightforwardly environmental, like don't trash the new planet, but the paper applies it more broadly, doesn't it?
Yes, the core idea is that preserving the existing ecosystem and crucially the physical systems of the new environment is absolutely essential right from the start.
Okay, but many of our likely first targets, the moon, Mars, asteroids, they might be abiotic, right? No complex ecosystems to destroy. So what's the danger there?
The danger isn't necessarily harming indigenous life, although that's always a concern if it exists. The real risk, especially on abiotic worlds, lies in our profound lack of understanding of how the colony's own physical systems, its habitats, its power generation, its resource extraction, will interact with the local geology and atmosphere.
We're talking about triggering unintended consequences, like unforeseen geological reactions or atmospheric changes because we started messing with things.
Exactly. Think about aggressive early attempts at terraforming Mars, for instance. Maybe we start releasing huge amounts of captured gases or introducing specific microbes to alter the atmosphere quickly. We simply don't know enough to predict all the potential non-linear planetary responses.
We could accidentally trigger some kind of runaway effect.
It's possible, and an unforeseen chemical reaction, maybe destabilizing subsurface ice, perhaps altering radiation levels in unexpected ways, an unintentional cascading consequence that ends up severely impacting the stability and safety of our own habitats years or decades down the line.
So the lessons from archaeology here comes from island colonies that failed because they overexploited their limited environment too fast? Cutting down all the trees without understanding erosion, maybe?
Precisely. They didn't understand the long-term regenerative capacity or the complex interconnections within their island ecosystem, and they paid the price. The warning for space is, be humble. Assume you don't understand the new environment fully.
So the best approach is, don't rush into massive changes. Maintain the status quo initially.
Yes. Prioritize careful observation, small-scale experimentation, and deeply understanding the local environment and our impact on it before launching irreversible, large-scale projects like terraforming. Slow, careful integration and preservation trumps rapid, aggressive transformation, especially on a world we are fundamentally unfamiliar with.
Wow. Okay, so putting all 8 lessons together, the ideal strategy, based on thousands of years of human trial and error, looks like this. Pick a place that's relatively close, large and resource-rich, set up multiple colonies nearby in a network, design them physically to promote social equity, populate them with at least 1,000 diverse people, keep the information flowing back and forth with Earth and other colonies, start planning the next colonization mission almost immediately, and tread very lightly on the new environment. At least at first.
That's a fantastic summary. It's an incredibly comprehensive anthropological checklist that goes so far beyond just engineering the hardware. It's about engineering a resilient society capable of surviving indefinitely in isolation.
Okay, so now that we have this pretty rigorous checklist derived from archaeology, the authors actually use it to evaluate potential space destinations. This is where the theory hits the cosmic road, right? We see which current targets look promising through this lens, and which ones might actually be setting us up for failure based on these ancient patterns.
Exactly. They apply the 8 lessons to known locations. And perhaps unsurprisingly, given lesson 2, size matters, and lesson 1, proximity, Mars comes out as the most obvious candidate.
Right. Big, geologically complex, lots of potential resources, relatively close. It ticks a lot of boxes.
It does. It offers a substantial physical base for potential self-sufficiency and that crucial resource diversity.
But the second best candidate they highlight is really intriguing, especially when you think about the challenges of getting there and operating the Jovian moons, Jupiter's system.
Yes. Europa, Ganymede, Callisto, primarily. They score incredibly highly, mainly because they are a perfect fit for Lesson 3, the archipelagic configuration.
Because they're all clustered together naturally.
Exactly. They exist as this tight, natural group of massive, distinct worlds. That setup is absolutely ideal for building that resilient metapopulation structure we talked about. It provides those inherent evacuation opportunities and allows for specialization between moons. And they also satisfy Lesson 2 pretty well. They're large bodies with, as the paper puts it, plenty of resources, especially vast amounts of water ice, maybe minerals locked underneath, possibly geothermal energy.
So in this framework, the network effect you get from that cluster of moons actually outweighs the increased difficulty and distance compared to, say, just going to Mars.
It seems so from a long-term resilience perspective. The ability to rapidly establish multiple mutually supporting colonies within the Jovian system offers a structural advantage, a resilience factor, that might significantly increase the odds of permanent success compared to putting all our eggs in one Martian basket, however large that basket is. The system's geometry matters.
Wow. Planetary geometry is a key factor for colonization success. Okay, what about going further out? Interstellar targets. Which exoplanet systems look good based on these ancient migration rules?
Well, the paper points to GJ 1061 as maybe the best candidate we know of right now. It's about 12 light years away, which is relatively close in cosmic terms. But the real kicker, the reason it stands out, is that it has 3 planets orbiting within or very near the star's habitable zone. And critically, they seem to be structurally close to each other within that system.
3 potentially habitable worlds right next door to each other. That's Lesson 3, the archipelagic configuration, playing out on a stellar scale.
Exactly. It's not just about finding one Earth 2.0. The ideal scenario is finding a system that inherently supports setting up a network of colonies right from the beginning.
Because you just can't risk everything on one world when you're light years from help.
Precisely. For an interstellar mission, that redundancy is paramount. If one planet fails, maybe it has unforeseen atmospheric issues or a geological catastrophe, the human presence can continue on the neighboring world. That system architecture provides built-in resilience.
Are there other possibilities mentioned?
Yeah, they briefly mention GJ 887 and also Barnard's star. Barnard's star is closer, only about 6 light years away, and has 4 planets.
Real planets. Yeah. Sounds good.
Well, the authors are actually pretty dismissive of it. They note the planets are likely too much like Mercury, small, rocky, probably lacking atmospheres or volatiles, to be what they call a desirable colonization destination.
So they fail. Lesson 2.
Yeah.
Not big enough. Not enough resource diversity for long-term viability.
Exactly. It highlights that just having multiple planets isn't enough. They need to be planets capable of supporting complex, self-sufficient colonies according to the other lessons, too.
Okay. Now, this is where, for me, it gets really interesting. We have to acknowledge the limits of the analogy, right? The paper itself points out some flaws, or rather some significant things the island model doesn't quite capture about space. And it revolves around what they didn't include in their analysis.
Yes, there are 2 really striking omissions when they evaluate potential targets, which is kind of ironic given the whole model is based on settling islands.
The first one is huge, especially given current space agency plans. They barely mention, actually, they seem to completely omit, the potential colonization of the moon.
Right. It's the focus of Artemis, China's plans. It's our closest neighbor, yet it's essentially absent from this archaeological assessment of prime colonization targets.
So let's apply their own lessons to the moon. Why might it be omitted?
Well, okay. It scores very highly on Lesson 1, proximity. Can't get much closer. That's a huge plus for that metapopulation safety net early on. But it struggles significantly with the next crucial physiological lessons. Lesson 2, size matters. The moon is much smaller than Mars, let alone Earth. Its geology is less complex, likely offering far less resource diversity and depth. Water ice is concentrated at the poles.
Okay, limited resources. What about Lesson 3, the archipelagic configuration?
It completely fails that one. The moon is a single, isolated body orbiting Earth. There are no other large moons or planetary bodies nearby in lunar orbit to form that immediate, resilient network. It is the isolated island.
So if the core lesson from millennia of Pacific settlement is that small, highly isolated, single islands were the most fragile, the most prone to collapse. Then the moon, viewed through this archaeological lens, looks like a potentially high-risk, single point of failure strategy for permanent colonization.
That seems to be the implication of its omission. Its proximity is its main saving grace, allowing for continuous support from Earth. But proximity alone, according to this model, doesn't guarantee success over centuries if the goal is true self-sufficiency and endurance.
It suggests a moon base might be fantastic as, say, a stepping stone, a science outpost, maybe a refueling station.
But perhaps structurally flawed as the site for the first permanent, autonomous human settlement designed to last for generations. It's potentially too small, too singular, too resource-constrained according to the patterns of past human success. The archaeology is waving a bit of a yellow flag, isn't it?
It really is. Okay, what was the second major omission? It relates to building our own islands.
Yes. The other thing the paper doesn't deeply explore is the idea of using massive fleets of constructed space habitats. Things like O'Neill cylinders, Stanford Torrey, or even networks of smaller orbital stations, each potentially serving as its own artificial island.
And this is where the analogy kind of breaks down, or at least gets complicated.
This is the aha moment the authors point towards at the end. They acknowledge the archaeological analogy holds up really well when we're talking about settling naturally existing planetary bodies, which have inherent physical limits, just like Pacific Islands did.
Right. You find an island, you work with what it offers.
But in space, uniquely, we gain the ability to literally create our own islands in the sky. We've never been able to do that on Earth. We couldn't just decide to build a new Hawaii next to an existing one.
But we could potentially engineer the perfect island habitat in space, design it specifically to have equitable resource distribution, fulfilling Lesson 4. Size it precisely for the 1,000-person minimum from Lesson 5.
Exactly. And then we could build, say, a dozen of them and place them relatively close together in Earth orbit, or maybe at a Lagrange point. That would satisfy Lesson 1 proximity and Lesson 3 archipelagic configuration brilliantly.
So we could use engineering to overcome some of the natural limitations the ancient mariners faced.
That's the implication. The authors admit we won't really know how this kind of artificial bespoke configuration functions socially and ecologically until we actually try it. The archaeological model gives us powerful insights for planets and moons, but it's less predictive for purely synthetic environments we design ourselves.
It definitely raises a fascinating question, doesn't it? If we can build, say, a network of a dozen habitats near Earth, each housing 1,000 diverse people, haven't we potentially got the most critical archaeological criteria for a thriving, resilient metapopulation right on our doorstep?
It's a powerful thought. It's the ultimate fusion of ancient wisdom about human social needs and cutting-edge technology. It suggests maybe the first truly permanent, self-sustaining off-world civilization won't begin on Mars or the Moon after all, but might actually start in habitats we build ourselves right here in near-Earth space.
Okay, let's try to wrap up this deep dive into what we can learn from ancient island settlers about heading to the stars. The Archaeologist's Guide to Colonizing Other Worlds. The main takeaway for me is just how clear the message is. Long-term success out there demands this incredible level of anthropological foresight, social planning, risk management based on past human experience. It's just as critical as getting the rocket science right.
Absolutely. We have to look past the sheer excitement of launch day, the technical achievement, and really focus intensely on the long-term human factors, the cultural elements, the social structures needed to endure for centuries.
And the key lessons distilled from that archaeological record, from millennia of trial and error, they really hammer home a few core principles, don't they?
They do. Prioritize proximity, at least initially. Maximize the size and resource diversity of your target location. Build networks, think archipelagos, not isolated outposts. Ensure your founding populations are large enough that 1,000-person benchmark and diverse in skills and backgrounds.
Right. And keep the connection alive, at least with information. Actively plan to expand outwards again from the first successful colony. And lastly, be humble about the new environment preserved first. Understand before you transform.
It's empirical wisdom, really. Based on what actually worked for human groups facing ultimate isolation in the past, resilience consistently came from complexity, diversity, and connection, not from simplicity or total isolation.
And this whole framework, it feels incredibly practical for anyone trying to really get their head around the full challenge of space settlement, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It moves the conversation beyond just, can we keep people alive in a metal can for a year?
To the much more profound existential question. Can our great-great-grandchildren survive and thrive for 1,000 years on this new world without succumbing to internal collapse or environmental failure. That's the real measure of colonization success.
We need to design our first targets, our first settlements, based on their potential to create a lasting, resilient network, not just pick the closest or easiest piece of rock to land on.
That seems to be the core message from the past.
Which brings us to a final, maybe provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over. Given that this analysis, rooted in successful ancient human migrations, strongly favors targets like Mars, in particular systems like the Jovian moons, because of their size and network potential, and given that it pointedly omits the moon, likely due to its singular nature and limited resources, according to these very same principles, what might that imply about the current very intense focus and resource allocation towards lunar colonization first? Are we perhaps in our understandable rush to get boots back on another world and establish that first foothold, potentially ignoring some fundamental hard-won lessons from our own history about what makes a settlement truly sustainable in the long run?
Could the push for the moon be setting up our first major off-world effort in a way that's inherently more fragile, more dependent, and higher risk from an anthropological perspective than other options might be?
Something to think about as we watch the next stages of space exploration unfold. What's the difference between building a temporary outpost, however impressive, and actually forging a permanent second home for humanity?
A question for the ages. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.